Okay, well, irrigation, guys, first part. There will be a second class on Tuesday, and obviously, if you can make it to the practicum, that's tomorrow. That's additional. So lots to cover. Most of the second irrigation class will be a lot on the rebate. The LADWP representative, I believe Martha, I believe it's the same person, but she will be here and give a little presentation on all the rebates that are available. So bring your questions for that class, the Tuesday one, and we'll cover a little bit more on irrigation. Today, we're mostly going to be kind of defining the garden's irrigation needs based on age of the garden, plant material, or irrigation system, soil, and then talking about scheduling the irrigation so it mimics the seasons, especially like a wet winter season, and then changing the garden as the changing the irrigation, sorry, as the garden matures. So I guess just to kind of go back before we get into the weeds of irrigation, it's important to remember that like the plants have evolved, all plants have kind of evolved to survive on different amounts of water depending on a lot of different factors. Many of them we'll cover today. But one of the big factors is kind of like, where did this plant come from? Like, what plant community is that plant from? And remembering that there's a lot of different plant communities or bioregions in California. So they, depending on their origin or like the plant community they come from, really is going to have an impact on what kind of irrigation they prefer. So California natives in the cultivated landscape, so the ones we typically see in gardens, are usually coming from the plant communities of chaparral, coastal sage scrub, oak woodland, and desert plant communities, which are all very drought tolerant, all really low to very low water needs plants or communities. So they have adaptations for that. They have adaptations to deal with the really high heat and low moisture of those plant communities, right? Because that's typical of their plant community. So because of their origins, they might have like a leaf adaptation, like smaller leaves or the fuzzy kind of hairier leaves to protect from evapotranspiration and like wind and things like that. So they're adapted again to their site, or to their plant community. So these adaptations are really for survival. You know, this is just so that another one would be summer dormancy, kind of a big obvious one. Some plants just like shut it down in summer so that they can conserve water. And all of those strategies and more are for survival, not for like aesthetics for the average person who's like, I want a nice green verdant garden. That's not what, they're doing this for survival. So if we want them to look more aesthetic or maybe more green, we can be adding a little bit more water, but some plants are like, won't even hang with a little more water. So it's kind of about knowing your plant, and that's where CalScape and any of the resources that we've mentioned are going to really come in handy. And also over time, you're going to learn. But again, knowing the plant community, I think, is really important, big factor that you kind of want to tie in and kind of get to know over time. California also has riparian plants. So these are plants like coastal strand, that's like right at the beach, like those dunes. Redwood forest plant communities. These plant communities are accustomed to more water. So especially just naturally, but especially in our more arid climate, if we're trying to plant like a redwood, in Pacoima somewhere, it's really going to need a lot of water. It's not going to be a low water need plant. It's not going to be considered drought tolerant for that area, right? So again, knowing where the plant comes from, but also where you're trying to plant it. Are you coastal? Are you inland? Like, is it kind of match with what the plant is used to? And if not, adjust accordingly. You know what I mean? So if this plant doesn't want to really be super inland, then maybe put it in a shadier spot, or maybe you're going to have to anticipate that you'll be watering more frequently because the plant is accustomed to it. So just want to bring it back to the plant community thing that we talked about in the plant ID lecture. Let's see. So in a nutshell, not all natives have the same kind of watering needs, and watering is not going to be a one size fits all. There's not going to be a formula. It's not going to be like one time. It's not going to be a per time per week. It's going to be a myriad of different complex and connected factors that's going to affect or is going to like create the optimal watering for all the members of your garden, because you might not have all plants from the same plant community, you know. So it's like, it's really kind of this like balancing act of the different factors and trying to find this optimal type irrigation schedule for what you've got going on. So this is mostly about giving you all the different factors so you can use your brain to like make it work, basically. Plants have evolved to survive on varying amounts of water depending on biotic and abiotic factors. And I think, yeah, that's got to move some things out of the way so I can actually see this fully. So abiotic factors would be non-living kind of background factors, like the kind of givens of your site. Excuse me. So soil texture, soil texture type, like we were talking about all last lecture, understanding the rate of infiltration. I'm gonna have a coughing fit like right at the beginning, guys. Okay. So the soil texture type would be like, if we, again, we talked about if we have those sandier soils, they're going to drain more quickly. They're not going to hold on to water as easily. And then the clay soils are obviously going to hold on to water longer and be slower to infiltrate. So knowing that is clearly important for when to apply water and like at what frequency. So your soil texture is going to be a big deal. So sandier soils, you might be watering more frequently because obviously they shed the water more quickly, and your clay soils, you might be watering less frequently. So that should make sense based off of last lecture. Another kind of abiotic factor would be any of these, like light, shade, heat, wind. You kind of think about water loss from the plant. That water loss is going to increase. So it's going to lose water more or lose more water with reflected heat in general, wind, direct sun, temperature, you know, like I guess I said heat. So wind, direct sun, those are all going to increase water loss from the plant. And things like humidity and shade are going to decrease the water loss. That intuitively makes sense, but it's just something you want to kind of juggle all those things in your brain kind of at all times. So reflected heat, I believe this came up at the first class. You know, if you have a plant in like a kind of a heat island, you know, that's, you know, kind of paved in concrete all around or asphalt, it might need more water than that same plant in like a park setting. So again, this is like reflected heat off buildings, off concrete, off, you know, our urban landscape. That's something to consider. And then just heat, obviously, in the day for plants, it's losing water if it's hot out. Let's see, wind, obviously Santa Ana's, we get these hot, dry winds. Those are going to suck water out of the plant. Tree canopy cover, let's see, brings, oh yeah, so tree canopy obviously is going to bring shade, but also humidity. Trees are respiring and creating humidity, like, you know, at a very micro level, but that is going to slow water loss for neighboring plants or any plant underneath that tree canopy. And so knowing the location of structures that cast shade or other plants, that's going to impact your soil moisture. Topography. Actually, going back to soil texture, I didn't want to forget that we talked about the native soils, but also soil texture, or just soil in general, for like potted plants, like the nursery potting soil is much looser and drains very quickly, and it's mixed that way. So knowing if it's in a pot, not like the soil mix that it has, if it's a much looser soil, it's going to dry out more quickly, right? That's kind of obvious, but it should all be said. And also if it's in a pot, if it's in a pot or container, the root mass is also restricted. So not only the soil that's in the container, but the root mass itself is going to be restricted to that little space. They're not able to extend out to beyond the container. So those will also lose water more quickly. And typically containers are above ground, so they also just you know, lose water more quickly because they're like exposed out in the world and heating up more quickly than like soil in the, you know, soil in the ground kind of thing. Anyway, back to topography aspect. This is stuff like if you, are you on a north facing slope or a south facing slope, or north side of your house or south side of your house? North facing slopes are generally shadier because of like, the way the sun is lower in the sky in the winter. So they're typically in the shade. And your south facing slopes are really getting full blasting, full exposure sun basically all year. You know what I mean? So knowing what the kind of aspect of where you're planting, canyons and slopes. So canyons, kind of collect water, and slopes shed water. So thinking, am I in a canyon? Am I in a slope? What's going on here? And that just generally kind of goes to like thinking about your space like a little mini watershed. So like if you just have a little space like a backyard, what is the high point? What's the low point? How is the water draining in that landscape? Just that little space, the little garden that you are maintaining, how does water flow on that landscape? Even at a micro level, it's going to help you determine watering irrigation factors, right? Let's see, I think there's a couple. Did I have any other things? No. So biotic factors, which would be kind of like living dynamic kind of factors, are things like plant water uptake and transpiration. Plant water uptake is just, the rate at which the plant uptakes water through its roots and moves it through its tissues. And then transpiration is kind of the water lost through the leaves of the plant. They actually are, losing water through it's the bottom side of their leaves, usually called this thing called stomata. It's like a little opening, they open and close. And anyway, they transpire moisture out of their system. And plants don't always so water uptake, the plant water uptake doesn't always keep pace with transpiration, meaning it's not, even if it's fully watered well. So maybe you watered just the day before, a nice deep watering, there's plenty of water in the soil. But if sometimes plants don't uptake it as quickly as they're losing it, maybe on a really hot day. So in that case, they might respond by having that kind of flagging or wilting tips of the plants and that is a response to heat, especially if they return to like the turgidity. So it's like the erect kind of full of water stem. If it returns to non-wilted in the morning, the next day, then it's just like, that was just that plant's kind of response to that excessive heat. And usually you'll see that either with new plantings, especially new plantings in their first summer. And if that's the case, you watered it, the soil was moist or something, and that was happening. Just that's a normal response, and you don't have to like worry. And the plant will probably adapt to that, in some weeks' time. And if it's an issue, or you're very inland, it's really hot, and you're expecting a lot of heat, you can also kind of do like temporary shade on the new plantings if that's, if you're concerned about it. So plant water uptake, they uptake water at different rates, and they transpire at different rates. Plants are different. That's like its own damn whole course. But anyway, age of the plants, yes, this is another kind of biotic factor. So obviously the smaller the plant, the smaller its root system. And so it doesn't, like, the whole point of us establishing plants is to get them to get these extensive root systems where they can, to grow into the surrounding soil, to create these extensive root systems so that they can handle longer stretches of time without water. That is when they're established. So when we're establishing them, they don't yet have those extensive root systems. So younger plants are pretty limited to their like small root ball that either they came in or that they're just, recently growing into. So younger plants or establishing plants are typically going to need more water than a more mature plant. And that establishment period is kind of like they need more consistent moisture than an established plant. This note here is, so gardens are going to be kind of inefficient on water until they're grown in. That's kind of what I was just saying. So you're going to be using more water in the year of establishing, or the years of establishing, than you will once they're mature. This note is that sometimes it takes as much water to establish a garden as a turf garden. So don't be surprised if you don't see those water savings that first year. Like maybe that's something you actually want to tell your client so that they're clear their water bill is not going to change that first year. I think I have a few more notes on that. New plants. Mulch, I guess, the mulch or mulch or soil organic matter. I think these kind of go hand in hand. We talked a little bit about the soil food web. So the more mulch you have, the more it's kind of, not the more mulch you have, but when you have mulch, it adds to the soil organic matter and the biology, you know, it's like feeding the life in the soil. And the more of that you have, the more life and biology you have in the soil, that means it'll keep more water in the soil once you actually water it. So the more alive your soil is, the better it is at keeping or holding on to water. But with mulch, you might have to apply a little bit of extra irrigation to pass through that layer of wood chips or bark, or if you're using that type of mulch. So that's just something to be cognizant of if you have like a really thick mulch layer, or you're having dry periods between, then you really got to wet that mulch to get down to the actual soil. So that might mean, yes, Michelle, you asked, I usually put my irrigation under the mulch. That's a great tip. Some people, if they're doing sprinklers overhead, maybe that's when you would have to add an extra precipitation to counteract for sprinklers. But within the case of drip, definitely would put it underneath the mulch for efficiency's sake. One last biotic factor I don't have on as a point here, but kind of certain horticultural varieties or cultivars are bred to be, let's see, like more kind of accepting of like a different variety of moisture. So like, for example, like Ceanothus typically doesn't really handle summer watering very well, but like a Ceanothus Ray Hartman, which is a specific cultivar, is a little bit better at that. And it can handle that a little bit better. So that would be a biotic factor because it's like the genetics, like that plant is bred to be able to handle a little bit more of the kind of garden conditions that we typically see. So that's also kind of a biotic factor. Oh, this thing. This is a great resource. I believe it's on page 47 of your workbook. It's, well, I guess I should say also page 45 and 46, or the two before this thing, is the summer planting guide for natives, which is also a great resource. But this is your kind of first year establishment watering schedule by planting season. So I know I was saying there's no real formula. You can't really, you don't want to just like, you know, go by the book. This isn't a rule. Again, this red arrow here says this is just a basic guide. This is not to be used as like an absolute rule, because the soil type, all the factors we talked about, sun, shade, that's going to affect this schedule. But this is super helpful, I think, to give you an idea of when you plant and what you should be expecting in terms of kind of at least relative watering. So kind of moving from left to right, I think of it as almost like the most ideal time to plant to the least ideal. So kind of like fall, winter. I mean, you can do fall, winter, spring, great, but ideally want to get as much rain as you can. So in fall would be ideal, and then winter. And you can kind of see it breaks it down for that first year because it's the establishing period. And what did I want to say? Oh, and that first summer is important, right? The first summer that they're in the ground, whenever they were planted, especially in a summer one, the following summer, not that first. Anyway, back to the kind of first three. It just kind of goes to show how it is important to water that first summer. They are not yet established. This is about the first year establishing period. You kind of have to expect that you'll be watering sort of regularly, but obviously you can tell in the winter, you like in any time it's the winter, you're doing less watering because you're counting on the fact that there's rain, but also it's cooler. So the plants are transpiring less. They are losing water, less water, sorry. So it's not just about like expecting rain. It's also like the plants are just less stressed. They're not exuding as much water out of their system. So this is super helpful. I think this is really helpful too for like newbies that are just like, I have no idea for like how to wrap my head around watering. This is like a nice little guide. But again, just a guide. Don't like, don't tattoo this to yourself or something. I just want to go over summer planting a bit. You do have the guide, and I think the guide is actually, it's awesome. It covers basically everything, the summer planting guide that you have. But essentially, wait, what did I want to say? Oh yeah, for summer plantings, it can be more challenging because obviously it's hotter. But especially if you're inland, like on the coast, you can almost get away with planting almost like most native plants all year long on the coast, even in the summer, most of them. But if the more inland you go, obviously the hotter it gets. So it can be a bit more challenging, especially for a summer planting. So it's easiest to plant in the summer if you're planting plants that are accustomed to year-round water. So maybe like riparian plants, they're getting water, they grow by the stream or by water, so they're used to that. Or grasses, they can handle summer watering. Or even our desert natives, a lot of the desert natives are kind of used to maybe a downpour in the middle of summer, you know, like that more monsoonal schedule. So those plants can typically kind of can handle a summer planting better. So if you want to like have more success, maybe stick with those plants that are more accustomed to year-round water. And then you want to be really careful summer planting anyone who's like especially sensitive to summer water. So that would be, again, like ceanothus, manzanita, especially like Fremontodendron. They don't like summer water. And so if you have to water them when they're new. So you're really kind of, you're just making more work. But anyway, Fremontodendron, trichostemma, the woolly blue curls, that's another one that's a little bit sensitive. It's sensitive about summer water. And even the Rhamnea, so the Matalia poppy, that also would be kind of a sensitive summer waterer. Let's see, anything else about summer planting? Yeah, you might find yourself watering, you know, several times, you know, maybe like 2 times a week, or 1 time a month, depending on the soil. So again, this is very variable. You don't want to get stuck with like, oh, it says it every 4 days. You know what I mean? If you have a clay soil, really heavy soil, and maybe it's very shaded, the area, then I wouldn't be doing every 4 to 5 days. So just thinking in terms of your factors that you have. Let's see, new plantings need water. I think this is said, but it doesn't hurt to say it again, but new plantings need to be watered more frequently than established plantings. That's an important takeaway that you should understand, is like, this is a first year establishing plant watering schedule. That is not going to be the watering schedule for an established garden. And just as a general rule, you don't really need to water if there's moisture at the surface level. You know, if the surface of the soil is wet or pretty moist, you probably don't need to water. So that's just kind of like a good rule. Let's see, where am I in my notes? When natives want water and why. So native plants, they love rain. Rain is like the highest quality water. Many of you guys, you can like tell garden just like pops after the rain, and that's because there is like nitrogen in rainwater, and it is like the purest water. People call it like the sweet water, you know. So best quality water you can give to your native plants is rainwater, so take advantage of it. And they are also growing during the season. In general, their active growth is like fall, winter, spring, maybe early summer, but they're basically utilizing whatever rainfall to then kind of, or whatever residual moisture to kind of keep them alive throughout summer. So just, I think this is just important to be like, the natural cycle is the best idea, like the best case. So we're trying to recreate what they're accustomed to. We want to mimic the rain as much as possible, and not just in the time of year, but also in like its frequency and in its spread. So what I mean by that is like, when we get rain here in the Mediterranean climate or in Southern California, we typically get, the frequency is kind of like, we don't get like, it's not like it's rain, it's not like mainland Mexico where it just rains kind of all for like, you know, several months at a time every day. We're getting like 3 days of rain, and then a little bit of a dry patch, and then another bit of rain. And that's what they're used to. And we want to mimic that. So they really are accustomed to these deep kind of infrequent soaks. That's kind of what the refrain is, you know, like a deep infrequent watering. And that's generally because, well, I'll get more into that. I'm gonna go on a tangent, but essentially you're kind of trying to mimic that as much as possible in terms of frequency. You don't want all the water at once. You want to kind of spread it out as best as possible, but you know, and then have some dry down. So when I said also though, we want to mimic it in terms of spread, you know, the rain falls evenly over the landscape. It's not like it's just raining on one plant. It rains on all of the soil, which is important because the plants are moving their roots into the surrounding soil because there's water in it. So it's important to remember that when you're watering, not just like putting the hose directly on the base of the plant or right at the base of the plant. You want to water that kind of postage stamp, or larger than a postage stamp, the square footage around the plant. also so that you're encouraging the roots to actually move outward and into the whole space, because we want them to be established, right? We want to encourage that extensive root growth. So let's see, as a general, oh yeah, I also, the plants want to absorb water in winter. You know, this is their, I mean, I already said this, but like, that's what they're accustomed to. We really want to just like encourage as much as we can that is already kind of natural for them. So watering them deep and well in the winter is key. And we can still water them in summer, but that's not what they're necessarily used to. You know, they're not used to getting a bunch of water in summertime. So again, our wet, cool winters, lower transpiration in the wet, cool winters because it's cooler, and then dry, warm summers, more transpiration, so more water loss. As a general rule, it's time for an irrigation event, right? Or a deep soak when the soils become dry at a depth of 3 to 4 inches. This is especially important with new plantings, but yeah, this is just a general rule, is if you stick your finger down 4 inches and it's dry there, then you can kind of consider an irrigation event. Whereas, like I said, if it's wet on the top, don't consider one. Try to water early in the morning or late in the evening. Again, this is the lower transpiration period of the day. So it's cooler part of the day. And that's when plants want to be receiving water, when it's cooler. That's what they're used to. You know, when it's winter, it's cool out when they're getting most of their water. So again, trying to kind of mimic that even on a micro scale. So in the morning as opposed to midday or late evening when it's cooled down. So checking your plants first thing in the morning, like I was saying, I think I said, the turgidity of the plant. So it has all the water it's going to have in the morning. So it's good to check them in the morning, because if you see that wilting or not, it's going to be more indicative than if you see it in the afternoon when it's hot. So evaluating them then is a good time. Oh, let's see. Careful with summer watering because of, well, root rots, particularly warm water, a lot of it waterlogged around the base of the roots of the plants. They don't like that. They don't want, they aren't used to that. Clearly, they not used to a bunch of water sitting around their roots when it's hot outside. So that usually creates conditions for root rot. And also you want to be careful you're not doing shallow waterings in the summer. A bunch of little shallow waterings are just kind of encouraging the roots to go to the surface, which is where it's hottest. And you're almost kind of setting them up to basically dry out more easily. Check guidelines for watering times. Yes, the guidelines part is, we'll get to it. How to water natives. So I guess I should just kind of make a statement here that's like, this is all just best practices, and you just got to make them fit for your situation, especially with the LADWP restrictions, the watering restrictions. Some of these things aren't really feasible to do exactly how we're saying. So these are the best practices, and try to make them fit for the situation. Obviously you have to kind of conform to whatever restrictions you have. So if you can't do this exactly, that's not the point. The point is to, like, you know, keep the best practices in mind and do your best, kind of thing. Watering natives. So we are replicating wet years of a Mediterranean climate. So we want a good rainy year, essentially, during the establishment phase. I mean, in general, you want a good rainy year for your plants, but you're trying to replicate this good wet year of a Mediterranean climate when you're establishing the plants. And that's usually, 15 to 20 inches of rain. That rainy season, 2018 to 2019 rainy season, I think we had more than 20 inches. So that was a good rainy season. And that's what you're going for in the establishment period. A rainy season like that is what you want to mimic or create for the plants. So you want to, again, the big thing is water as deeply and infrequently as possible without causing plant stress. So watering heavily, at least 2 feet down, that's like the root zone, and allowing a good dry between the watering cycles is kind of the goal. This obviously kind of depends on the plant's, the plant age, but either way, even with a young plant, you want to start encouraging the roots to move deeper and more outward, more laterally. So getting a good heavy watering is good for all the plants, not just in their establishment period. This is how you want to be watering, that they're accustomed to that, again, that dry down. they're not accustomed, they're not like vegetables where you like kind of keep it consistently moist all the time. And that's because they're just a totally different beast. So let's see, I said watering at the root zone, the drip line, or the canopy reach. I guess this is a good time to mention it, but kind of the roots are most active at the mirror image of the kind of furthest out branch that they have. So if I'm like a tree where my fingertips end, down below the soil is where my most active root growth is in general. And so you want to make sure you're watering that. You know, people just water right at the kind of like base of the plant, and you really want to make sure, again, you're watering that whole square footage around it so that we're actually getting water to the roots. Well, you should, controllers like weather-based irrigation controllers or even timers, they're great, but just don't rely too heavily on them, especially in winter. Because yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of is obvious, but just if we want to expect that you will be adjusting them pretty regularly, like a couple times a year. And that's also, I think why you want to really not rely heavily on it is because you actually want to start to hone like your tactile skills and like hone the intuitive part, you know, not just rely on a timer. And that's also because, you know, these things aren't perfect systems, you know, they are very helpful, but I think really starting to learn your dry down is important. Sorry, the tactile part, but also the dry down period. So when you have a new garden, starting to like, you know, really get to know how long does it take for this space to dry down to this point, because that's going to be really helpful about like knowing your soil, knowing the space. Okay, it takes like 2 weeks for it really to reach the appropriate dry down, or maybe this one only takes 1 week. So each garden is different. So that's just why I wanted to say, you know, check your soil also with your hands, not just with a soil probe or not just utilizing controllers. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. But LEDWP, because I think also adjust these very often, because you should expect that your watering schedule is not going to be the same. That should be obvious. It shouldn't be the same all year long because these plants, again, aren't used to getting water all year long. And so it's not going to look the same. The transpiration rates are different at different parts of the year, right? So just keeping in mind, it shouldn't look the same, your watering schedule all year long. The offer for LEDWP has an offer, a rebate program for a soil probe. We'll have the LED DWP rep next week, and she'll talk about this. But again, I still want to encourage you to do things like check the soil by hand also, not just the probe. And usually you want to check the moisture between 3 inches and 18 inches down, depending on the age of the plant. So younger plants, 3 to 6 inches, older plants, you know, down to 18 inches. And okay, these are the LEDWP watering days, which are, I don't work for LEDWP, guys, so if you have really specific questions, I can't help you that much. They are very frustrating and almost, anyway, I won't get into it. I don't work for them, so I can't answer too many questions, but I do understand how they relate to this. And again, it's not always perfect to get the watering that we're suggesting within this, within these restrictions. So like odd numbered houses, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and the even ones are Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday. So you can't technically water every day with sprinklers. This is for sprinklers. So here in this little note, this is in your workbook, I believe. I'm not really sure where, but I believe this is in there. It has to be. But watering with sprinklers, especially like spray sprinklers, these are like those traditional ones that throw a lot of water with high precipitation rates. They are limited to only one cycle of up to 8 minutes per station per watering day. So just 8 minutes per station. Or if you have the water saving ones, like a rotary nozzle or the stream rotors, it's 2 15-minute cycles per watering day. So this is their restriction. And also it has to be watering, it's outside of 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. So kind of like it's kind of hard because it's like everybody works in those hours. So make sure you're setting the schedule for outside of those water. You're not allowed to water, even by hand, technically, you're not allowed to do hand watering between 9 and 4 p.m. You can do handheld watering any day of the week. You just can't do it from 9 to 4. I mean, according to this, like I said, I'm not gonna tattle on anyone. Okay, so that is, oops. Wow, am I already here? Let's see, what time is it? Oh yeah, okay, so it's 6. Let's take a break then. We'll come back at 6:05, and let me just make sure I'm not missing. Okay, yeah. Let's do yeah, 6:05 then. Break. Yeah, we have a lot of LADWP folks here, right? I feel like you guys should chime in and correct me if I don't know all the things perfectly. So if there's some LADWP stuff that I'm totally botching, feel free to jump in.
Claire, I was saying that this is Fernando. I was saying that we're not with EWP, we're with the city council, but we can connect folks with EWP to get those questions answered for you all.
Got it. Yeah, and when Martha, I believe it's going to be Martha, when she comes next class, she's a total knows everything in and out. So it's great to kind of just pick her brain. We'll leave enough time for you guys to ask all your questions because she has an answer for all of them, anything regarding the watering and the rebates. So also, and she does give you like the direct access line to them in the, well, she did last time. So that's really helpful too. If you do have questions about rebate stuff or irrigation things or any of the watering days, you got our direct line or you'll get it. What did I say? 6:05? I think I did.
Hello.
Claire, I'm curious.
Yeah, what's up?
Where do you live? Because it looks like you live on a campus or something. Like, what is your relationship with this whole Payne Foundation?
I'm not an employee of Theodore Payne. I'm just an independent contractor that's been contracted to teach the class. But I'm actually in Baja right now. I'm like kind of like 7 miles east of Ensenada.
Oh,
And yeah, so I work in Baja quite a bit. I go back and forth. So I do quite a bit of work down here. So yeah, I have a place down here. It's like, it's a junky little shed. Maybe that's why it looks like a campus.
so you're an independent contractor and you have your own like landscaping business, and then you just teach this course?
Yeah, essentially, like down here, I do quite a bit of more consulting, and yeah, and then I'll do kind of one-off jobs and things up in the States, like in San Diego and Los Angeles and things like that. But yeah.
So you could do the Spanish speaking session.
Yeah, I was originally going to do one of them, but we have so many Spanish speakers, they don't need me. So
I was just curious because we used to have in my neighborhood in the city of Los Angeles in the harbor area, a little narc squad, I guess you could call it, a little white economy car that said Department of Water and Power, whatever, LA City, and it would if someone were spraying or sprinkling, they would literally, there was a phone number you could call or text 211 or something, and they would literally come driving up to your house and give you a ticket if they saw that the ground was wet.
wow.
And so that's why I thought that these restrictions had passed, yet you just put up today, 2021, about the water restrictions during the day from 9 to 5. I wonder if anyone knows about that.
Yeah, Martha will definitely be able to tell you how current it is. I believe it's, I mean, as far as I know, it is still current. Maybe they don't have the funds to have the squad still, but definitely those still are in place. And like I said, I don't actually work with them, so I don't know the deets, but I imagine I do. I mean, at least the last class, Martha definitely confirmed. So it still exists for LEDWP folks. That is, it's not everybody is, you know, within their jurisdiction, I suppose.
Right.
Oh, I guess. Okay. Yeah, it's also 6:05, so I'll go back to class. But yeah, I think the best case scenario for that is Martha. She's going to be great next week. She's got more answers than I do regarding that.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about different delivery systems, so like different irrigation systems and how they kind of work with natives. Okay. So for the most part, and I think actually maybe it was Jill, I think you mentioned this in one of the breakout rooms, something similar to this, but essentially you kind of want to implement this cycle soak or pulse type irrigation as much as possible, or not as much as possible, sorry. You want to implement this especially in clay soils or where you have kind of infiltration issues. It can be really beneficial. Essentially, it's kind of helps with spaces or soils that have runoff issues or infiltration issues. So maybe your heavier soils, this cycle soak or pulse irrigation method is kind of the best case scenario. And the way it works is essentially like you're kind of watering like 3 days in a row to achieve like the cumulative irrigation that you want. So say you want 1.5 inches, a precipitation rate of 1.5 inches. Like when you're irrigating, you talk in precipitation rates, right? So how many inches you want to put down. So if you want to put down 1.5 inches, but you have heavy clay soils, then you basically kind of break that up and just apply it a little bit each day. And so, and that kind of also makes sense with our most effective rains. The rain, you know, a rain that over the 3 days, a rain of 2, like if we get 2 inches over the course of 3 days, and it's like a scattering rainfall, it's like nice gentle rain over 3 days, that is so much more effective, and the soil can actually absorb it than a rain of like 2 inches in 2 hours. Like that's, if a 2-inch rain in 2 hours is going to just be almost purely runoff, right? So we want to have that, we want to mimic that, you know, that kind of pulse irrigation, we call it. So again, it's like breaking it up into several days and applying the full cumulative amount of inches that you want to achieve for the space, right? So that's going to encourage better penetration down into the soil, but also better root uptake, because they're going to have time to uptake it. And those 3 days of watering would be considered one watering event, like one irrigation event. That wouldn't be, that's not like you watering 3 times a week. That's one irrigation event, 3 days, because you're putting down the 1.5 inches or the 1 inch that you want to put down. And I think that's kind of what it says here in this wordy little side note. But yeah, you're segmenting your total runtime. This timer on the left has the option, so that like red circle that says cycle soak. Sometimes they actually, the timers and whatnot have the feature involved. I'm sorry, have the feature already there, like cycle soak. And essentially, so say I need to water 20 total minutes to get my 1.5 inches. But at 5 minutes, it starts to pool up and I start to see runoff. Then I can't just run it for 20 minutes, because after 5 minutes, the other 15 is just going to be going off into the driveway or wherever else, right? So the cycle soak basically allows you to program in, okay, it's going to cycle for 5, it's going to soak or just pause and let the water soak into the soil for whatever you program it for. So if I have, say I wanted to put the full time of 20 minutes to get my 1 or 1.5 inch, then I cycle for 5 and go through 4 cycles, because 4 times 5 is 20, right? I think. And then you program in the soak time. So that would be 5 minutes, soak of 10, 5 minutes, soak of 10, or soak of whatever time is necessary for the soil type you have. I believe so that's the cycle soak method. You can also, if you don't have it on your timer, or or you don't have that feature on your timer, you can also just like utilize multiple start times. So like start a 5-minute cycle every 30 minutes or something, if you don't already have that mode kind of in your timer. So that's kind of like irrigation timer specifics. But the concept of this cycle soak or pulse irrigation is still very useful for watering, even if you're kind of hand watering or something. You know, this idea of letting the water actually infiltrate. Brenda mentioned this too, like earlier, but like they put a gallon down and you let it actually infiltrate. And when you start to see stuff pool up, you don't want to keep watering because the soil isn't absorbing it. So the cycle soak method is important to remember for any type of irrigation system, whether it be sprinklers or, or drip or whatever you got going on. Oop, did I skip? I think I did. Oh yeah. Okay, so sprinklers, a lot of different options here, typically kind of high volume, throwing out a lot of water. There's obviously there's the spray nozzles that are the old school kind of higher precipitation rates, and the kind of newer ones, especially the ones in the rebate program, they're like the rotary or stream rotors. Those are typically lower precipitation rates, so they're considered kind of water conserving. But in general, sprinkler nozzles are delivering water at either less than a 1/2 inch to 3 inches per hour. So precipitation rates, again, it's measured in inches per hour, because that's how they talk about irrigation, as precipitation. So it's like they act like it's essentially like the same way we measure rain in inches, we measure irrigation. So these sprinklers can put down a 1/2 inch or less than a 1/2 inch to over 3 in an hour. And so there's a big range. The pros for using sprinklers would be they're relatively easy to fix. It also replicates rain, like we were saying, like it's the overhead water falling from the sky all over that's replicating that rain. DU is distribution uniformity. So kind of evenly distributing the water all over like the rain does is easy to achieve with sprinklers. You just have to have that like head-to-head overlap with the spray. So you can actually cover the whole space with water and like kind of mimic the rain essentially. So DU is the distribution uniformity, easy to achieve with sprinklers. Another pro is you can just put it on pop-up, so they can be underground and then pop up. and again, essentially overhead water. Cons is it does not qualify for the turf replacement rebate. There are several rebates. I think there's like 7 that Martha goes over. The turf replacement rebate is specifically turning your turf, removing your turf and putting in a drought tolerant landscape. That specific rebate, you can't put in sprinklers. It has to be a drip system or hand water. But you can say you were like, there is a rebate for changing your old spray nozzles to the water conserving ones. And that would be for folks that are maybe want to keep their lawn or are not interested in the rebate for removing the turf replacement rebate program. Maybe they already have sprinklers and have natives in there, but they could benefit. So there is a replacement rate, a rebate for replacing these nozzles, the old school ones, to water conserving ones, and it's different than your turf replacement program. Anyway, so these don't apply for that. Another con is that they can be inefficient. Obviously they're spraying water in the air, so it can just, with wind drift, it can, or evaporation, you could be losing some of that water, so it's not directly going onto the soil always. And then runoff can be an issue, especially with the higher precipitation rate sprinklers. So ones that are putting down 3 inches per hour, they're throwing out a lot of water. So if you're not paying attention to the runoff, you could be losing, watering the sidewalk or something and not really your plants. So that's something you definitely want to be sure you're getting good infiltration and appropriate infiltration for whatever the precipitation rate you have on your sprinklers. So if you are, going back to what I just said in that last slide, if you are experiencing runoff with sprinklers, you can do either the kind of pulse irrigation style, the soak cycle method, and that's going to make it more effective. Or you can just change out the nozzle, like I was saying with the other rebate program, change out the nozzle and change it to a lower precipitation rate. So something that doesn't put out as much water at the same time interval, and then just run it longer. So maybe it puts out less water, but you just run it for a longer amount of time. So that's something you can do if you're seeing runoff issues with your sprinklers. Let's see, yeah, we talked about that. You might be like with a conventional spray head, it might look like watering 3 consecutive days in a row for like 20 to 30 minutes in the early morning, approximately once a month. That just like, let's say that's an example. And then in the long intervals between the watering events, like, you have 3 to 4 weeks maybe before you water again with one of those deep waterings, you might want to do these like refreshing sprinkles, which are sometimes just, and those you would also want to do either in the morning or the late afternoon, typically in the afternoon. Those are not considered watering events. Those would be like a 2-minute run on the sprinklers. And it's just to kind of wet the leaves, wet the soil, kind of keep things cool and kind of clean off the leaves. It's just kind of refreshing things. It's not an irrigation event, but that's something you can also do with sprinklers that you can't do with maybe drip or something. Next one. So drip irrigation, these are kind of the lower volume irrigation systems. And there's lots of different drip systems, but there's like point source and there's grid pattern, or like the inline drip. I'll kind of get into those in a little bit, but generally drip systems deliver water at lower precipitation rates. 1.6 inches is definitely a high end amount of water for a drip system, and they go down to like 0.16 inches per hour. So you really have these much longer run times of drip because you typically want to put down more than 0.6 inches for your native plants. But that's also because they have a lower volume. Again, they're putting out less water than the sprinklers. And also drip is like, well, anyway, not all drip's the same. There's a lot of different kinds, and just knowing your equipment is key, and making sure you plan accordingly and your site, and make sure there's quite a bit of maintenance and installation and all this around getting an appropriate drip system. So just make sure you're not just like, oh, drip's great. Pros, they're more efficient because, especially underneath mulch, in the chat we've talked about that. So underneath the mulch, drip is great for that because it's, doesn't have to pass through the mulch. It's more efficient because it's also not spraying all over, no wind drift problems, and it's directly, the water is just dripping out, drip by drip, soaking into the soil directly. So it's, getting into the soil like we want. So it is more efficient. It does qualify for the turf replacement rebate, and you can run them on much larger zones. So the sprinklers, have to reach each kind of section, and you could be running drip tape or drip line polytubing all over, snaking it around your garden. So you can have much larger, also because of the low volume, like you don't need as much water pressure to run a drip system. So, and then the cons, sometimes the breaks or like leaks can be harder to detect, especially if it's under mulch. This is a low volume thing, so you're not going to see like a big gushing broken pipe. It's just going to be something that kind of gets wet over time. So that can be annoying, I guess. It is a little more challenging to achieve that distribution uniformity, because it's just like kind of like wet spots along a line or where you put the emitters. So getting the right, like even watering around like a square footage stamp or surface area is a little bit more challenging, because it's not just water from above, right? And then, yeah, if you want to mist the foliage, you typically have to do it manually if you want to do those kind of sprinkler, kind of refreshing sprinkles that I was talking about. There are micro sprinklers that attach to drip. There's a lot of different like little adaptations you can do, but that would kind of require you to have either like a separate drip system for your refreshing sprinkles or connect it. It was kind of be a pain in the ass in terms of logistics, but they do exist. Oh yeah, going back to so point source drip and the inline drip. This picture here is like inline drip. That's the grid pattern. Typically, it's kind of designed for you to put them in a bunch of different parallel lines. And the point source drip is, the tubing, and then the little tiny tubing that they call spaghetti that comes off, and an emitter at the end. So the point source drip is kind of snaking through the garden with emitters that end up at the plant. And some of the really common errors with that type of drip system, the point source drip, is putting too few emitters. So maybe just putting one for a plant, or not adding more as the plant grows. You want to, again, make sure you're watering the whole kind of surface area around the drip line of the plant. So one of the errors is putting too few emitters, or putting it too close to the plant, like putting it right at the base of the plant, and then, kind of suffering root rot and stuff like that. Crown rot. And then also too short of run times. Typically, if it's got a really low precipitation rate, if you run it for only 8 minutes like you're used to with a sprinkler, it's really not going to allow the water to get down deep enough. So those are the most common errors with a inline, actually all drips, but mostly the point source drip. The inline drip, which is this one here, which is just several holes along the line that are emitting drops out of the tube itself. These are, they were designed for a really different system. They were designed for agriculture and plants that want consistent moisture. So agriculture plants typically want consistent moisture throughout the day, and they also evapotranspire. They transpire much more readily or quickly. They lose a lot more water. So they need that more water and more consistent moisture. So inline drip was actually designed for that, and not designed with native plants in mind and their desire for like a nice dry down and a deep watering. That's not how it was designed. So sometimes it's kind of tricky to get that inline thing to work appropriately. It can work really well if maybe you have like a shaded area like shade loving plants or water loving plants, and that like that consistent moisture. And then you could have that kind of parallel line style inline drip, and then it would kind of make sense. Or even a small space, like maybe you have just like a little hedge area and they're all the same plant. That's kind of, because it's traditionally made for, agriculture, like, lines of vineyards or just vegetable crops, the drip tape that you see with vegetable crops. So it's not the inline drip is not necessarily like the best case scenario. It's totally doable, but again, just keeping in mind, like its system is about wetting the soil and kind of logging it up with water until it kind of seeps to all the other spaces and evenly waters around. But that's not always the best, because it's very slow. So you're just kind of slowly letting your roots sit in water. So it's not always the best. I guess I don't want to say it's the best, but it's not necessarily jiving with the like the soil ecology that native plants are used to. I'm not trying to sway anyone any which way. I just want everyone to kind of understand the differences. Let's see if I have, and just understand that they're obviously different than sprinklers. Not all watering systems. Every watering system has their pluses and minuses. Let's see if I have any more other things on that. So this is a manufacturer, kind of like a spec sheet for an emitter for, the emitters for a drip line. And this is for more like an inline one. So like I said, those like, the tubing. The thing here, I guess, is that typically emitters are, they don't show the precipitation rate. If you like look at the emitter itself, it typically says like 0.6 gallons per hour, but you don't want, you're not watering gallons per hour. You want to know like how many inches you want to put down. That you want to know precipitation rate, because that's typically how we talk about irrigation. So you want to know like how many inches am I putting down. So the 0.6 gallon you have to convert. And last class, I like made everybody do the math, and it was kind of a bad idea, because in the end, there's a million spec sheets online and you can just look at them and they convert it for you. And maybe it's not worth everybody having to like remember math. So anyway, this is a spec sheet for the default kind of emitter is usually 0.6 gallons per hour. And here, what you want to get from this essentially is, so the emitter spacing on the tube is 12, like say we have one that's 12 inches, there's a hole every 12 inches, and then you put your tubes like every 12 inches apart. Let's say this top left, can you guys see my cursor? I ask this every class, I think, but so that top, thank you. So that top 12, let's say, yeah, we've got the emitters 12-inch spacing. So every square foot, you've got, like a thing on each corner, an emitter. And so in that case, this is the precipitation rate. The 0.96 is the inches per hour that 0.6 gallon per hour emitter will emit if you put it at that spacing. The closer the emitters, essentially, the more precipitation you're putting out. So because it's more water, because there's more space emitters. So in this case, if it's 0.96 inches, it's almost an inch an hour, right? So if I want to put down 1 inch, I got to just water it like basically an hour and 5 minutes. I hope it's like, I personally have a hard time learning math audioly. I like have to do it. So if any of you are struggling with that, I totally understand. This is not easy for me to learn via like someone talking about it, but I hope it basically makes sense, is that as the closer the emitters are, the more precipitation they'll have. So you can see when the emitter spacing is as 24, it's like half an inch almost. So you would have to increase your watering time if you want to get the full inch of watering, right? And then in a point source situation, so like when you have the emitter on the end, because this is with the inline tubing, if you have a bunch of emitters, you want to make sure that you are actually placing enough emitters to achieve this kind of spacing and watering the surrounding soil and square footage. So if you just put one little emitter for a plant that's just 12 inches just all by itself, you're just going to get you're just going to water that 1 square foot. So that 1 square foot, yes, is going to get an inch of water, but nowhere else around the plant will. And you have to remember, you're watering the whole square footage, the whole drip line. So the square footage of the plant might be more like 3 to 6 square feet that you're watering, depending on obviously how large the plant is. But so that's what you want to kind of do. You're kind of with the inline, the point source, you would be kind of mimicking the spacing and spacing appropriately your emitters. So the further apart you put your emitters, even with point source, you're going to have less water, so you have to run it longer. Drip, man, you can talk about it forever. Also, pore space, water flow, going back to this graphic that we had in the last class. Also, so the drip thing and where you locate it would be different. Where you put your emitters would be different kind of for depending on your soil. So I guess this is gonna be not, so how would you, like if I had a drip emitter in the middle of this sandy soil thing here, oh gosh. if I had a drip emitter right here, it's going to go straight down. It doesn't really move laterally. Whereas if I have a drip emitter here in the middle of the clay soil, it does move a bit laterally, as we talked last class. So what would we want, like sandy ones close to, like, sorry, sandy soil, would we want the emitters closer together or further apart? Is like, anyone want to guess on that? Make a guess.
Closer.
Closer.
Closer for which one? For which type of soils?
Sandy.
Yes.
Sandy.
Thank you. Yes. So like, okay, I'm glad. Okay, this is making sense then, because if you guys are answering it correctly, it means I'm not so far off. So yeah, the sandy soils can be closer together because they're not moving out laterally as much. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then also for run times with your drip, the run time for your clay would be different than the way you would irrigate in terms of run times for your sand. Like obviously the sandy soil drains more quickly. So your run times would be what? Longer or shorter for sand? Run times being the time you actually put on the irrigation on for.
Shorter.
Shorter for sand or longer for sand?
Shorter.
So I would argue longer. I think I heard
Longer.
someone longer, because you can put more water out in sandy soils and it's going to drain quickly. So in the clay soils, you want the shorter run times, like, only 5 minutes, because after 5 minutes is an example, but after 5 minutes, you're going to start to see it pool up. So you can actually put longer run times on a sandier soil because it's going to absorb it, right? So you're putting more water down and it can absorb it. Let's see. Next. Practical tips. Oh, I got something in the way here. A lot of these are just kind of reiterating things, but wait, did I say, what is this for? What's this note here? So many native plants will benefit from an infrequent deep irrigation post-establishment. So this is an established plantings. They will benefit from an infrequent deep soak during the dry season. Many plants native plants can handle like a summer watering, essentially. Established plants can handle a summer watering, but many will not take any irrigation in the summertime. So you got to know your plants, but it's just kind of knowing that, like, yes, you can water in the summer for some, and for some established plants, and for others, no. And then let's see, not on new plantings and young gardens, you may need to water lightly. In between, yes, I kind of mentioned this in addition to the deep soak irrigations. So yeah, with your, okay, well, this is particularly true if you're planting new plants in a mature garden. So if you have an established garden with some new boys in there, then you may need to water in between. You'd still put everybody on the deep soak irrigation because you want everyone to get used to that cycle, but then your newer plants would get maybe a light watering in between. They don't need to have maybe the 2 feet down irrigation, but maybe like, a good foot down for the younger ones. So finding the balance is the key in life, in everything, right? Like there's never an answer. But on any garden, the light refreshing sprinkles. Okay, yeah, I mentioned the light refreshing sprinkles. They are on any garden, they're gonna like freshen the plants, wash the leaves, especially in our kind of like polluted urban environment. This helps. And keeping the soil surface a little cooler and somewhat moist. So that that's going to help in all situations. And again, it's not considered a watering event when you do these light kind of sprinkles, like these 2-minute little things. That's not a watering event. That's just kind of like, it's like giving them like a respite. Like you gave them a glass of like lemonade. You didn't like, water them forever. Let's see, I have a note here, all sprinkler water. And then, oh yeah, all the sprinkler water you want, any kind of watering, again, remember to try to do it at these times of day when it's the coolest, when the plants are transpiring the least. So maybe you do your deep watering in the morning and your sprinkler, your like light sprinkle in the afternoon, So, and again, this kind of goes back to Molly, what you were talking about, but it's like some municipalities are more strict than others about frequency of watering and when you do it. So obviously conforming to whatever is the rule is what you should do. Just keeping all of these kind of tips in mind is about same with the finding the balance. Oh, let's see. Oh yeah, this is kind of like, this can be kind of like an in-class exercise, I suppose. So this graph on the right is the average monthly precipitation for Los Angeles. You can see, 3-ish inches here, a little over 3.5. You add these all up, it's basically 15 inches. This is LA, just general. This is just general average, our average rainy season. So we're talking 15 inches that we normally, not normally, I would say, but on average that we're supposed to get. But comparing that to this year, this is actually for Pasadena. So, the weather stations are for specific places. Pasadena typically, I think, has in the 20 inches of rain, whereas the rest of LA is 15. So, but anyway, this one's for Pasadena. And this is comparing this rainy season to the average. So here you have October, this is the rainfall that was actually measured in November. And this is the total rainfall for that season. So this is the first rainfall in November. So it's only at 0.07, the same. And then this column is basically it's accumulating all of the rain. So this is the cumulative for after November and December. This is the season total rain, right? And then this is our average. This is our monthly normal. This is what we expecting to get, which is 3.5, or sorry, well, less than 3.5 inches. This is all in inches. So we got only 1.5, or sorry, I keep saying 1.5, 1.3 inches. And then our average is 3.3. And so this is the difference. This is what we're missing. This is how far off we are from the average. So we're negative 2.03. So that's kind of what you have to make up in terms of irrigation. And then here on the right, it's season to date for normal and departure for season. So yeah, this is the monthly, and this is what normally you would be expecting. The cumulative at this point would be 5 inches of rain. And so the departure for the whole season is negative 4.21. So, and then you can kind of keep going with this. So essentially January only received 0.71 inches, which is a total of 2. So, for the whole season. And then we normally get 4.5. Drew, this table came from, I think, LA Almanac. This is not a source this is just LA Almanac, just kind of got it off the website. We will talk about the weather stations and the resources next class. The ones that are available to everyone. This is just online. I just grabbed the Pasadena one, but this is I love this thing. This is so cool that they put this together. But anyway, where was I? Oh, so 0.71 inches in January. The monthly normal though is 4.5 inches. So we're way off, 3 inches. So it's just gonna keep accumulating our season to date rainfall. So we've only received total this year, May's not in, but we've only received 5.7 inches. So really the departure for the whole season is negative 13.6 inches of rain that are missing basically. So that's what that's kind of saying is annually, if we want to be watering our natives 15 inches, or in the case of Pasadena, maybe 20 inches, if you planted a garden in November of 2020, a brand new garden, you needed to water at least 13.5 inches to make up for what was missing in this rainy season. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, does anyone know how would this be different? Okay, so if I planted a garden, let's say I planted a garden in November 2020. I just said I needed to irrigate quite a bit more this year because of our kind of crap rainy season. And how would that compare if I planted a garden in November of 2018? So that was the year that we got a lot of rain. LA got 20 inches of rain. Pasadena surely got its 20 inches. What would the watering schedule look like for that garden if I planted the same garden, but in 2018 of November? Watering schedule. Anyone want to chime in?
This is Drew. It would depend on the spacing of the watering events, right? Because if these 20 inches came down in 5 events, that means there could be, weeks of no water in between, which might not be ideal for new plantings. And, who's to say that all of that rainfall kind of was delivered to the soil and didn't just run off?
good point. If we had this, I mean, knowing 2018 and 2018, 2019, I don't know if you were in Los Angeles at the time or anywhere in Southern California, we had just good water pretty steadily throughout the season. So it wasn't like a freak year where we just had like 6 inches and then another 15 or something. We definitely had like kind of this ideal watering situation where we had regular watering from the month of like October or September all the way to like April and May. So in that case, what would you think then?
In that case, it seems like a pretty low maintenance in terms of irrigation season. You really wouldn't have had to deliver that much at all.
Right. Yeah. So that's kind of the point here is that is a great point though, Drew, that essentially like it does depend on how much this, because this is just the total for the month. We don't know how it fell, but you will be on the ground living in the space, so you'll know, right? But also that it means that like in a good rainy year, you basically don't really need to water them, or you like you said, very low maintenance in terms of irrigation. So as long as you're kind of living in and existing in that rainy season and you're like, wow, it's still raining, probably don't need to water those guys. I should probably, turn off the irrigation system if there is one, and being aware of this kind of thinking, like if it's just the season keeps going on and you're getting into January and we still haven't had rain, which is kind of what we should expect. I mean, as climate change happens, like no, but this is kind of, I guess, just a way to think about it. Like it's usually going to receive around we want to go for about 15 inches of rain, for LA on average. So if we're not getting that, we have to compensate and actually irrigate for that lack is the kind of the point of this one. Let's see if there's anything. Okay, I guess I'll move forward. This is a cool little thing. This is just on LA Almanac if anyone is like a dork like me and likes kind of just like getting in the weeds. Irrigation by the numbers. Let's see, I think I have a bunch of, no, okay. This is kind of a funny phrase sentence, but generally 0 to 1.5 inches per rain event, so per irrigation event, every 21 days during April through October. So, and that's going to equal 15 inches total. That's like about 10 watering events. So 15 times 1.5 times 10 would be 15 inches of applied irrigation. This is just kind of, again, a general. You might not need to water at all depending on like the palette of plants you have, the exposure, maybe it's very shaded, or the drought stress tolerance of the plants. Maybe you have a bunch of cactus or something. But generally, in our dry season, you're looking at, with established plants, you're looking at, a 1.5 inch precipitation that you want to give your plants even in the dry season. And again, this is very dependent. It could be 0. That's why it says 0 to 1.5. But you don't really need to go more than that. You don't need to be doing, 3 inches or something, or 5 inches or whatever. It is the summertime after all. 1 gallon of water per square foot. That is approximately what 1.5 inches of rain delivers per square foot. So when we get 1.5 inches of rain on one little square footage, that's like basically the equivalent of a gallon of water. So on the same square foot. So if you're hand watering, wait, I have a note, I think here. If you're hand watering, it's not just, you're not just watering that one little square foot of the plant. Again, you're trying to reach multiple square feet. So it's not about like, oh, look, I just put 1 gallon on my plant because that's 1.5 inches, I'm done. It's like thinking about that's just per square foot. So if my plant actually takes up 4 square feet, then I would have to put 4 gallons at least on to reach that 1.5 inches. I hope that kind of makes sense. Winter months should bring, okay, this is what I kind of just talked about. They should bring about 15 inches between November and March, so our rainy season. And this is the level of rain that's sustainable for a native garden, but the extra summer irrigation will keep them hydrated and like attractive to, I think attractive to folks that want that look. So if you want the verdant green and lush and they don't want any kind of summer dormancy, well, not all plants, some plants go summer dormant even if they are irrigated. But yeah, if someone wants that attractive, that type of attractive look, then summer irrigation can make sense. So 15 inches in the winter, and also maybe potentially 15 inches max in the actual summer. So if you have a dry winter, okay, these are just like little extra tidbits. If you have a dry winter, this is what I said in the thing, you're gonna add irrigation to equal the average total area. So again, compensating for whatever lack is missing in the dry winter. And then always as much as you can, get ahead of any extreme kind of weather stuff like Santa Ana winds. That's considered extreme because they're hot and dry. So plants are like, that's shocking to them. And any, heat waves, is coming. Get ahead of that. And especially during the summer or during establishment, and for plants that are not in their natural distribution. So some plant that is not from Southern California, these ones you want to make sure that you're watering prior to the plant needing it. So when it's the day of the heat wave is not when you want to be watering it. You want to water it a few days before. So getting ahead of the water so they have it available to them. They're not going to uptake it the second you put it down. And if you have a wet winter, keep the irrigation system turned off until 2 to 4 weeks after the last big rainfall. And then you'd start the irrigation system. So like I said, in that good rainy year, like the 2018, 2019 one, you could have turned your irrigation system off and then wait until a few weeks after that last kind of big rainfall. And that's going to be determined by your soil, right? If you have a sandy one, maybe it's sooner. And if you have a clay soil or a heavy soil, maybe it's going to, you can start your irrigation system a little bit later. Practical tips continued. A lot of these things I've already said, but if you have sandy soils, expect to increase the frequency of irrigation. We kind of have gone over this, but the sandier it is, faster it drains. So you might just have to add like 20% more water than, a different garden or something. So just expect that. The first year, somewhere between 30 and 50 inches of water from natural rainfall and irrigation water. So we're talking that 15 from rainfall and potentially 15 in the summer. That is like a range you could typically be expecting for annual, the total water that the plants would be receiving. So 50 is all the higher end, but maybe maybe you're receiving more rain or are also watering more frequently because of the plant choice or plant selection. Hand watering might be necessary in the first several months. And sometimes it's just more efficient with hand watering, especially if you have like a mix of plants. Sometimes it's just easier to hand water those, and obviously you charge accordingly. Where to water? Watering where the roots are, or where you want them to be, or where they should be as the plant matures. So again, going back to that drip line concept, which is like the furthest most reach of the plants, of their branches, that mirror image in the root system down below the soil would be that edge of those roots is where you want to water. So when it's a new plant, it's pretty close to the plant, right? Because maybe you just planted it, it's just that little root ball that it came in. You want to water along that interface where the native soil meets the potting soil. But also as it gets older, like I said, you want to water the surrounding soil. So where you want them to go, you want to encourage the roots to move out into the soil. So watering out there, and also as it gets older, the plant's going to get bigger, get a larger canopy. You should be encouraging it to move even further. So encouraging them to just extend their roots into the surrounding soil is like the point of this. And yeah, watering the soil for the soil to then give it to the plants. It's not about just watering the plants. Like I said, not just putting the water right at the base of the plant. It's about watering the soil around so that the plant can uptake it and its roots can find it. I think, yeah, we're getting pretty, do I have another one? Oh yeah, slopes. So irrigating slopes, that can be kind of a challenging, different world because obviously because of the slope and gravity and erosion. So you might have to do the pulse cycle thing with your watering to make sure that it's actually penetrating and not just running off. Runoff can be a real issue with the slopes. And or you can do even terracing, or maybe just like individual mini basins for each plant, or even kind of like I would not hugelkultur, but like a mini kind of water stop above or below where the plant is, you know, to kind of get the water to slow down and seep into the soil wherever you have that kind of like speed bump. So you can do kind of like a light, you know, shallow speed bump, or kind of dig in like a, something that kind of stops the soil from eroding down. So just being, I mean, really with slopes, you just want to make sure you're not just turning on the irrigation and like walking away. Make sure it's actually getting into the soil and not running off and not creating more erosion. And, a lot of times you might want to consider like a check valve so that you prevent backflow, because if it's like on the slope, if you don't have that, you might just be like getting most of your water at the bottom half. You want to make sure you're not just draining, you're actually watering adequately throughout the whole slope, not just one part of it. I think actually, oh yeah. I have a poll. That's fun. We pulled out all the stops today. Let's do the poll. Lloyd, I don't know if you're still there. You want to throw the poll up? It's just like another one of these kind of imagine a situation thing. I don't know. Where is Lloyd?
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Oh, okay, yeah. So this is like a scenario. I just want you guys to kind of think about, I like the idea of making you guys kind of think about like irrigation in a different situation. There's no right answer, obviously. So I have a south-facing slope with sandy soils, very recently transplanted with small shrubs and perennials. So not super deep-rooted guys. In September in Sun Valley. And I've decided to water 1.5 inches total for this month. In terms of total monthly watering for this scenario, does that seem like too much water, too little water, or a good amount? Like, this is like the style of my polls. There's not really a right answer, guys. There's like better answers and worse answers, I guess.
I have a question, Claire. Would it
Yeah.
depend on what type of shrub it is?
It definitely does. I couldn't, there's not enough, that's like, it limits me to how much I can write in there. So
Okay.
I tried to just put small shrubs and perennials, more thinking like perennials tend to be shorter, like smaller rooted, and so not trees and not larger shrubs, which typically tend to be deeper rooted. But you're right, like there's exceptions, you know what I mean, even in that category. So it definitely would depend on it, but I wasn't able to put all the specifics in there. Is everyone? Yeah, I think most people have voted. So I think it shows the results when I end the poll, right? Can you guys see this? Okay, share results. So yeah, most of you said too little, and some people said a good amount. Nobody said too much, which is great. Yeah, too much, definitely not too much. Like the factors I'm looking at, it's south facing, so full blasting sun all day long, sandy soil, so it drains pretty quickly. So it's not holding on to water. And also they're very recently transplanted. So these are very recently transplanted. Like Brenda was asking, I was thinking these are small shrubs, perennials, so short rooted guys. And it's also September. So it's still like, we still have some heat in September. It's not, we're not into like autumn, or nor winter, obviously. And then in Sun Valley, which temperatures get up pretty high there. So the 1.5 inches we were talking about, that was like a general rule. For me, I would think like this might be too little, because especially as they're recently transplanted, you might have to go in with another watering. The 1.5 inches in the middle of summer might make sense for an established garden. But again, with all the factors in there, I might think that it would need more frequent watering than that, especially since they're recently transplanted. If that was planted in September, one watering, did I say that? I guess maybe I didn't say. I've decided to water 1.5 total for this month. Yeah, I didn't say it was one watering, but yeah, I would consider that it might need a little bit more, because 1.5 would be a nice deep watering for them, and I would think they would want a little bit else on the other sides of that, if that makes sense. Yeah, and then a good amount potentially, but like I'm leaning more towards too little. But again, this is a made up scenario that I just pulled out and there isn't a right answer. Maybe it is a good amount. In like the alternate universe, you know, like maybe it was. Anyway, polls are fun. Let's get to homework. Your homework for this week. Oh, I guess I should, polls gone. Evaluate a client's irrigation system. So an irrigation system, whatever it is, if it's hand water, if it's drip, if it's inline drip or point source drip, or if it is, what's it called? Sprinklers. Figure out what's the make and model, or at least get somewhere close so that you can figure out the precipitation rate. Because with the sprinklers, you can pretty much figure out the precipitation rate just going online. And even with the drip, go to the kind of manufacturer spec sheet, like the one that we had in the on the slide. And usually that's like a paper that's jammed in with the drip tape or something. And what I want to know is how long would it take with this system that you're reviewing, how long would it take to irrigate 1.5 inches? So if that you have a system that, you know, it puts down 3 inches in an hour, you have sprinklers or something, then if I want to get 1.5 inches, that's only a half hour, right? Right? 3 inches? Yes. So I want to know how long would it take to irrigate 1.5 inches with this irrigation system that you are reviewing, that you're telling me the make and model of, and what would your irrigation plan look like for the first year? So kind of using the, like what we were, the kind of in-class exercise of knowing that first year, what are you thinking in terms of water? Very general. I didn't give you like, is it a south slope? Is it a this? Just kind of give me like an idea of what you're thinking, how much water per month maybe, you know what I mean? And you should, it's a garden that I don't know. So if it's an established garden, you just give me that rationale. Like I would suggest this kind of watering schedule because these are very established plants. They don't need a lot of water or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Give me a little bit of information so I can understand how you came to your conclusion. So that's homework. Oh, Brenda, yeah, Brenda put up the Eventbrite. Definitely sign up for the pruning one and the one tomorrow. Thank you. Irrigation will be tomorrow. There, it's the 10 o'clock and the 1 o'clock. And then the pruning one she has up here, right? This is the one you just put up. Yeah, and that one is, I have it written down here on the 29th. So after, you know, 2 weeks from tomorrow will be the next one. So, and then she's put up the irrigation one for tomorrow. So definitely sign up. I like highly recommend them. Also, you get your like, you know, you get to like be a TPF and like, you know, get all your answers, your questions answered. It's like so many questions pop up when you actually get to see stuff in real life. I'm just making up all these scenarios on polls and it's like, you know, it's not the same. So please sign up for those. I really encourage them if you can make it. And next Tuesday, we're going to be back at irrigation. So it's all irrigation from here on out, guys. Anyway, any questions? I'm going to stay on. Anyone else who has to run, we'll see you on Tuesday. And yeah, irrigation.